Hello, welcome to Asia in Review from ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jiang, and we have a very exciting show today. We're going to talk about the art of sexuality at the Honolulu Museum of Art. For those of you who are watching this from outside of Hawaii, the Honolulu Museum of Art is a very important institution for art and culture in Hawaii. And we have today Shawn Eichman and Stephen Salel, both curators at the Museum of Art, to talk about this topic. And Shawn and Stephen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
And I really look forward to this show and learning about all the art, especially the Asian art collections, and the upcoming show you're going to have on Modern Love, 20th Century Japanese Erotic Art.
Oh, we're looking forward to it too.
That's right, yeah. So audience out there, we are going to show some images from this exhibition, but it's nothing like what you thought. So Shawn Eichman is a curator of Asian art at the Honolulu Museum of Art. His current project includes masterpieces of landscape painting from the Forbidden City, a recent project, so that was 2011, and several Japanese art exhibitions at the Museum of Arts. This year's show also include Light from Shadow, Gold in Japanese Art. And Stephen Salel is currently the Robert F. Lange Foundation Assistant Curator of Japanese Art at the Honolulu Museum of Art. And he has written and published on Japanese erotic art. And together, Shawn and Stephen have published a text called Shunga, which means erotic art, stages of a desire, which is related to this upcoming exhibition, Modern Love. So, did I say anything incorrect?
No, I don't think so. Not
Okay.
at all.
So maybe we'll have you start to introduce just a little bit about the Honolulu Museum of Art in case people are not familiar with it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Our museum is the only accredited museum for fine arts in Hawaii and one of the major museums for fine arts in the Pacific region. We were incorporated in 1925 and opened to the public in 1927. So we have more than an 80-year history of presenting art to Hawaii and our international visitors here. We have a collection of about 50,000 works of art that continues to grow. So we're one of the major collections in the United States and in the Pacific region. And of all of the areas that we're famous for, probably we're most famous for our collection of Japanese prints. We have over 10,000 prints in our collection. It's the third largest collection in the United States.
Wow, that's amazing. Talk a little bit about your Asian collection before we get to this particular exhibition, Modern Love.
Sure. We're a private museum. We were founded by a woman named Anna Rice Cook, who was a daughter of a missionary family that came to Hawaii in the 19th century. And Mrs. Cook was very aware of the diversity of the ethnic makeup of Hawaii. So when she founded a museum, it was really important to her that all of the different peoples that lived in Hawaii were all represented in her museum. So she really focused on a very comprehensive collection, but in particular, she focused on a comprehensive collection in regards to Asia. And that's something that in the 1920s, when we were founded, was really quite remarkable. I think she was very conscious of the importance of the Japanese community here, of the Chinese community, of the Korean community, of the Filipino community, and I think that she was remarkably forward-thinking in that regard. And she, by collecting Asian art in the 1920s, she gave us a big jump on a lot of other museums that formed their collections much later. So we were able to acquire really significant collections in a lot of areas that you don't find in a lot of other museums that specialize in Asian art. For example, she was very progressive in her thinking about Korean art. And when you think about the fact that in the 1920s, Korea did not exist as an independent country. It was actually a colony of Japan at that time. So the fact that she was aware of Korea as a separate tradition in and of itself is really quite a remarkable thing. And she put together one of the finest collections of early Korean ceramics anywhere in the world. It still it rivals even the collections at, for example, the National Museum of Korea.
That's really amazing. So would you say the largest collection you have are about Japanese arts?
Yes, definitely. Overall, our largest collection is Japanese woodblock prints, where we have a little over 10,000 prints. It depends on how you count them, but a little over 10,000. And recently in 2003, we acquired a major collection of Japanese rare books from the same period, from the 17th to the 19th centuries, which has expanded our print collection, really more than doubled our print collection, because we acquired over 11,000 volumes of Japanese rare books from that period. And we're still cataloging that collection, but we've already found almost 30 editions where we have the only surviving copy of that book anywhere in the world.
Wow, that's really, really amazing. So the recent collection, was that bought or was it donated?
It was purchased, it came from a very famous scholar of Japanese art and literature who lived in Japan named Richard Lane. And Richard Lane actually went to graduate school here at the University of Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
and had a very long relationship with us. So he left his research library to the museum as a gift, as a bequest to us, but he didn't have any heirs. And so his art collection went to the municipal court of Kyoto City in Japan, where he lived. And we approached the court in Kyoto about acquiring his art collection along with the research library that he donated to us. So in 2003, we acquired the entire collection, which in total at the time consisted of somewhere between 20 and 30,000 works of art. So
wow.
It was a massive collection. When you consider that over the first 80 years of our history, we put together a collection of 50,000 works of art.
That's right, plus
then,
now suddenly.
in his lifetime, he put together a collection of almost half that much just by himself.
In addition to Japanese arts, any other, you talk about the Korean ceramics, and what about Chinese arts?
Chinese art is truly one of our great strengths. In particular, we're very, very strong in Chinese painting from the Ming Dynasty, and it is one of the glories of our collection. You mentioned one of the exhibitions that we did a couple of years ago was a collaborative exhibition with the Palace Museum, or some people may know it better as the Forbidden City in Beijing, which of course has the imperial collections. And when we approached them about the idea of bringing together paintings from their collection and from our collection that were by the same artists. So just to give you a sense for the level of our collection, we were, for that exhibition, really on the same level as the imperial collection in Beijing. So it's quite an old and quite an important collection.
I remember seeing that collection. It was amazing. It really was amazing.
We were very honored because the Palace Museum gave us permission. Actually, the government of China gave us permission for the first time to bring several very early 14th century paintings out of the country that had never before been allowed to leave China in all of its history. So that was quite a historic moment for us to be able to bring those paintings to an international audience.
Talking about that kind of collaboration, my question related to this is in terms of exhibitions, if you bring other paintings into the museum for exhibition, just think about the logistic of it, you know, all the shipments and protection and funding.
It is immensely
Share with
complicated.
us.
Yeah, much more so than people generally tend to realize, and particularly in a case like that, because we were working with a very prominent national museum in China. They wanted to be sure that their paintings were very well taken care of, especially because some of them had never been allowed to leave the country before. And so it really took an army of people and about 3 years of planning to put that show together. But more recently, we've been working with more and more contemporary artists in Asia. And I think that Stephen has really been focusing on arranging a lot of loans from contemporary artists in Japan, which bring a lot of different kinds of complications of their own.
We've been, in preparation for the upcoming exhibition, Modern Love, 20th Century Japanese Erotic Art, we've been working with a lot of contemporary artists including artists who produce manga, that is Japanese graphic novels or illustration art. And it's been a wonderful opportunity for someone like myself who is used to working with the works of artists who have died centuries ago. It's wonderful when I have a question about an artwork to actually be able to send off an email to the creator and get a reply within the day about what he or she was thinking about.
I'm sure that's really refreshing.
It is, it is.
We used to joke in the Asian department, though, that the difference between our department and the contemporary department was, thank goodness we didn't have to deal with living artists.
Yeah. Certainly a lot of these artists have very particular ways in which they want their artwork to be presented.
Oh, I see. That's why you said thank goodness, because then you had more logistics to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, what we've found, though, is that a lot of them are really wonderful people to work
I'm
with.
sure.
And one of the great pleasures of it is that it gives us an opportunity, particularly for a new art form like manga, where it isn't necessarily widely recognized as being an art form for a museum yet, to give some of these artists their very first opportunity to have their works displayed in a museum setting is something that I think is just as exciting for us as it is for them.
Well, that's great. Talking about art collections, let's look at a few images of the collected arts that you have. Control room, let's look at the first four images there.
This is, of course, one of the most iconic works of Asian art in our entire collection, and one of the great works of Buddhist sculpture, I think, anywhere in the world. This sculpture comes from China. It comes from around the 11th century AD, and is really representative of a great tradition of naturalism that starts to occur during that time. I think that the wonderfully relaxed pose and the casual spirituality that comes from the sculpture is something that is of immediate appeal to almost everyone who sees it.
Mm-hmm. Next one, please.
Why don't you take this one, Steve?
Sure. This is a work that has been in our collection for several years, several decades, but it's only been within the past year that we've really learned a lot about it. Last year, a scholar from the Kyushu National Museum approached us. He had spent much of his career researching this artwork, and it's a ceremonial flower basket that was produced during the 12th century in Shiga Prefecture, Japan. Mm-hmm. There were 20 such baskets made at that time, and there's so many ways that we can talk about it. Perhaps the most important thing to say about its design is the way that it uses what was at that time a very revolutionary idea of point symmetry. That is, if you cut the basket into three equal sizes, you'll see that that pattern is identical in each of the pieces. That pattern sort of spiraling from the center outward. But after it was produced in the 12th century, it stayed at the temple in Shiga Prefecture for the following 8 centuries. And then in the 1920s, apparently this temple came under hard financial times, and they decided to sell off some of the baskets in order to make funds. This particular basket was the only one that left Japan. It was acquired by a private collector and eventually ended up in our museum's collection. As soon as the Japanese government realized that the artwork had left the country, the other remaining baskets were designated as national treasures.
Oh, wow, you can't take them out anymore.
Exactly.
And so we have the only one that's outside of Japan.
That's
all
amazing.
of the other ones are all designated as national treasures, and they're kept at the National Museum in Tokyo.
Wow. And sometimes you look at the history of some of these paintings or artwork, you know, just amazing to see their travel path and, you know, what happened along with
They
them.
lead very long and complex lives.
That's right, definitely. So the next painting, please. Now, next photo, please.
One of the great Japanese prints in our collection, probably the most famous Japanese print in our collection. This is Evening Snow at Kanbara by the great 19th century designer Hiroshige. And we have the largest collection of prints by Hiroshige anywhere in the world. We have over 3,000 designs by him.
Wow.
I think that it's a very quiet scene, but it's often heralded as one of the best representations of traditional Japanese aesthetics ever made. And I think that it's part of the quietude of the scene that really captures that. One of the things that, I mean, we could talk about this print for hours, but one of the things that I particularly love about it is the way that the light gleams off of the snow in a nighttime setting. If you've ever been in deep snow at night and you've had that moment where you see the snow gleaming when there's no moon that's lighting it, it's really quite a poetic experience. And I think that Hiroshige captures that beautifully here.
The sense of serenity is just words can't describe.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And we have a very early state of this print, and our print is generally recognized to be the finest quality surviving copy of this print anywhere in the world.
And the next one is the last one before the break. So we'll have the next painting, please.
Okay. Sure. This is a Chinese hanging scroll. It's a painting of the Bodhisattva Guanyin, who we were seeing in the first sculpture that Shawn introduced, the Bodhisattva of Mercy. And it's a painting that dates from the 13th century, and it comes from the collection of Richard Lange, which Shawn was talking
the recent
about.
collection you were talking about.
Right,
there.
we collected in the year 2003. Because of the immense size of that collection, the process of vetting the artwork and cataloging all of the works will probably take us about a generation.
Maybe more. Yeah.
So it's not being shown now? Nobody has seen it in public?
This painting has been on display once at the museum since it's entered into our collection. But we display our paintings for limited periods of time because of, of course, something that is 700 or 800 years old is very sensitive and very fragile. And so we try to limit the amount of exposure that it has so that not only are we able to see it today, but that our children and our grandchildren will still be able to appreciate it in future generations.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's take a short break. This is ThinkTech Asia. I'm your host, Jiang. We've been talking about the art of sexuality at the Honolulu Museum of Art. Actually, we are going to introduce this art of sexuality right after the break.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel. That's Ted Ralston. You know, Ted is the host of Where the Road Leads. It shows every Friday from 4 to 5 p.m. It's about technology. It's about how people collaborating and solve problems with modern technology. It's where the road leads. We all know that. We should all be listening. Join us there, 4 to 5 p.m. every Friday. Now, what about that do you agree with?
All of it.
I knew he'd say that. Aloha. Say aloha.
Aloha.
Good.
Hi, we're live. We're back. This is ThinkTech Asia. And we've been speaking with Shawn Eichman and Stephen Salel, both curators of art, Asian art at the Honolulu Museum of Art. So, so you have this show that's upcoming on modern art.
That's right. Modern Love is actually the third and final segment of a series of exhibitions that deal with the topic of sexuality in Japanese art. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about the art scholar and collector Richard Lange, and we mentioned about how in 2003 we our museum had the opportunity to purchase Richard Lane's collection of paintings and woodblock printed books. One aspect of Richard Lane's collection is erotic art. He was actually one of the world's foremost scholars on the topic of shunga, and along with some Japanese scholars, published quite a lot of research about these artists. And throughout his career, he strove to make this artwork considered a very refined and important aspect of Japanese art. So when we acquired his collection, we decided that these 800 and so erotic paintings and prints needed to be shown. And from 2012, Shawn and I have collaborated on these exhibitions.
So this is the third of the 3 exhibitions, and are all paintings in this exhibition coming from the Richard Lane collection?
The works from the first 2 exhibitions were a mix of both works from the Richard Lane collection and also famous paintings and woodblock prints from the museum's previous permanent collection.
Okay.
We wanted to talk about the issue of sexuality in broad terms, and so a lot of the artworks that we showed were not particularly explicit, but they dealt with topics of gender, and also some of the most famous Japanese woodblock prints, which, like Shawn explained a moment ago, our museum is quite famous for, deal with images of women from the Yoshiwara pleasure quarters, which was essentially a brothel district. And these women were, although we refer to them as courtesans, that's a rather elegant synonym for a prostitute.
Let's do this. Let's look at some of the images of the paintings so that our audience members can have more of a visual sense.
This is a work by an unidentified artist from the 17th century. He was active during the Kambun era, which is around the 1660s. And Richard Lane actually was the person who brought historical attention to this artist. He named the artist the Kambun Master because of the era the artist was active in. And in the first of our exhibitions on Japanese erotic art, we featured this painting. It's a section of a larger hand scroll. And it's not only one of the first works of Japanese erotic art, but it's actually one of the first works of the genre of ukiyo-e. That is Japanese paintings and woodblock prints that our museum is so well known for.
Wow, amazing collection. Next painting, please.
In the upcoming exhibition, which deals with works from the 20th century, we want to talk about how that tradition of ukiyo-e continued. And one of the last famous woodblock print designers was this artist, Hashiguchi Goyo, who was active during the 1910s and 1920s. This particular print is from around 1920, and you can see the way that Japanese printmaking has evolved since the early days. It has obviously developed a very Western style. Goyo was certainly influenced by European art and these images of nude bathers, such as like the works of Edouard Degas.
One thing I think about this print that is particularly interesting is when we look at it today, it doesn't seem particularly shocking to us. It's fairly demure, and there's nothing terribly explicit about it. And interestingly enough, if you went back 100 years before Goyo, nudity was very common in Japanese print design and in Japanese art in general, and there was nothing particularly shocking about nudity. When you think it was a society that practiced communal bathing in public bathhouses for the most part, and they looked at nudity in a very different light than we did. But interestingly enough, when European ideas about art and about the nude started to enter into Japan, suddenly nudity became something very different than it had been before. And the Japanese, along with ideas, Western ideas about how to depict the nude, they also inherited a lot of what you might describe as Victorian morality. So suddenly, within a few decades' time, nudity went from being something that was commonplace and nothing particularly noteworthy to being incredibly controversial and shocking. And there's a great example, the painter Asai Chu, who trained in Europe and studied European oil painting. He came back and did a monumentally scaled picture of a woman during her morning bath that won first prize at one of the Japanese government exhibitions, but caused outrage throughout the press in Japan because of the whole idea that depicting a nude would corrupt the morality of the country. And Goyo's print comes only just a few decades after that controversy happens. So it's very interesting how much the idea of nudity can be shaped by the particular cultural context that you're born in, and how much it changes just from decade to decade during this period in Japan.
Yeah, that is even though it had existed in the society, but over time, with the different influences, the idea of what that means started to change.
Sure.
Yeah.
And one of the great challenges that scholars like Lange faced in Japan during the 20th century was that Japanese censorship laws applied universally to artwork as well as pornography. So, for example, that print by Goyo that you saw, if that had been published in a Japanese catalog in the 1950s, it's entirely likely that they either would have just cut off the bottom part of it so that you couldn't see it, or they would have pixelated it down in the sensitive areas. And people like Lange were outraged by this because of the fact that it really violates the artist's aesthetic intentions.
That's right.
In depicting the art, and so for years he led the fight to allow for uncensored publication of images like this. And this is something that we hope that we're continuing Lange's legacy by doing this series of exhibitions at the
we'll
museum.
need to talk about the censorship after we see the paintings. So the next painting that we saw just briefly,
Sure. This is another aspect of the upcoming exhibition, Modern Love, is the role of manga, that is graphic novels or illustration art, and how they communicate ideas of sexuality. In a lot of ways, Shawn and I see manga as being a contemporary successor of ukiyo-e woodblock prints. They not only appeal to the common people in the same way that woodblock prints did from the 17th through 19th century, but also, as this particular painting by the artist Maruo Suehiro shows in the upper left corner, he's actually drawing directly from art history, from the woodblock print of Utagawa Kuniyoshi, active in the early 19th century, Kuniyoshi was famous for his depictions of monsters or warriors, and he produced one print in which he made a subtle comment about censorship at that time. Throughout the Edo period, the shogunate was making efforts to eliminate erotic art or works that were controversial for other reasons, works that endangered public morality, as they said at that time. And so Kuniyoshi produced satirical works that criticized the shogunate's efforts. In this painting by Maruo Suehiro, he's making a comment on that censorship. Ironically, Maruo himself was subject to such problems. Some of his artwork and films film projects that he was involved with were seized by the government, and it shows that this is, even in the present age, a constant battle.
It's a definitely interesting topic. Let's take another short break, and we come back. We have a couple more paintings to see and talk about this whole interesting concept of a topic of censorship.
Sure.
This is ThinkTech Asia. We've been talking about the art of sexuality at the Honolulu Museum of Art. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on the ThinkTech Digital Series. The show is every Wednesday from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and I want you to watch this show because I think that when we talk with artists on the show about what they do, how they do it, and most importantly, why they do it, I believe that it resonates within each of us, and we find something inside of ourselves that brings us closer to all of humanity. That's what arts are there to do, and that's what I'm here to do on this show. That's Center Stage. It's on every Wednesday from 2 to 3 o'clock. I hope to see you there.
Hello, we're back. We're live. We've been talking about the art of sexuality at the Honolulu Museum of Art. So we have two more paintings, photos of the paintings to see, to show you before we get to talk about this question of censorship and other interesting topics.
This is a painting by a local artist, Yumiko Glover. There is the final section of the exhibition, Modern Love, 20th Century Japanese Erotic Art, deals with Japanese artists who are currently living in Hawaii and who in some ways represent a sort of diaspora of Japanese erotic art. Mayumi Glover, Yumiko Glover, excuse me, has been living in Hawaii for several years. She graduated from the art department at the University of Hawaii Manoa and is actually affiliated with the museum. This is a painting of hers. It's a work from the series Moe Elements of the Floating World. From the title itself and her reference to the floating world, you can tell that she's influenced by Japanese art history, particularly works of ukiyo-e woodblock prints. But she's talking about the contemporary Japanese sexual culture, and in this particular case, talking about costuming, which we often refer to with the Japanese word cosplay or costume play. Yumiko tells an interesting story about how one day when she was living, when she was visiting Tokyo, she went to the district Harajuku, which is known for people gathering and showing off sort of eccentric fashion. And she came across a group of women who were dressed like the models in this painting in French-made costumes, and they were surrounded by photographers. It looked like Yumiko had stumbled upon a professional photo shoot, but in fact these were amateur photographers, and the models were merely there to bask in the attention of these photographers. It was a scene that deeply troubled Yumiko, and it compelled her to begin this series of paintings where she contemplates contemporary sexual culture and the role and the reasons behind things like erotic costuming.
I think that Yumiko's painting is a great example of something that we found over and over again when we've been looking at erotic art produced in Japan, really going back all the way to the 17th century. And that's that while on the surface at a first glance it really appears to just be, you know, pure images of sensuality, really when you start to consider what's going on, those images of sensuality are a vehicle for social critique. And Yumiko in particularly is very conscious of troubling aspects of contemporary Japanese society that she wants to discuss and explore in her paintings. And of course, one of those is the whole issue of public exhibitionism and things like that. On a deeper level, even still with this painting though, one of the fascinating things that came out as we were talking about the painting with her was the sexual exploitation of domestic workers, particularly domestic immigrant workers in Japan and other parts of Asia. And that's something that was very concerning to her, and something that she really wanted to explore through this painting.
That's really interesting too. So definitely art has a public role in terms of a social critique.
Well, and interestingly enough, in Japan and with Japanese artists, often erotic subject matter provides the vehicle for presenting that social critique. And I think that's something that we wouldn't normally associate with erotic art.
That's right. And what's interesting, so far the images are not so explicit, except that the next image is a little bit more explicit.
Sure.
So let's look at the last image.
This is work by the Hawaii-based artist Masami Teruoka, and if it looks slightly familiar, that's because it's a modern version of probably the most famous image in the history of Japanese shunga. That is a page from a book by Katsushika Hokusai. We're very familiar with Hokusai's landscape prints. Like many other Japanese artists at that time, Hokusai produced works of erotica, and the image he produced, which is commonly known as Dream of the Fisherman's Wife, is sort of an iconic work of shunga. Masami Teruoka has been producing works that deal with sexuality throughout his career, and in around 2000 he produced this modern version of Hokusai's print. It's obviously a sexual encounter between an octopus and a diver. but something that is more difficult to see in the image is that there are condoms that are floating around the image, surrounding the figures.
On the right hand?
You can see that
Yeah,
she's
yeah,
holding one of them, but there are actually, what, 7 different condoms, I
That's
think? That,
That's right.
of course, it's an octopus. So.
Right. And the reason for the inclusion of condoms is, again, sort of similar to what Shawn was saying about the socio-political aspects of erotic art. Masami Teruoka, during the 1980s, was surrounded by people who were very personally affected by the AIDS epidemic. And he began to produce artwork that dealt seriously with the agony that many people dealt with as a result. Although he was interested in discussing topics of erotica, he often focused on the dark side of that subject. And this is a great example of that.
I think one of the fascinating things for us as art historians is that when Masami wanted to deal with the very serious social issue of the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, he turned to traditional Japanese erotic art as his source material for it. And that's, again, perhaps, you know, from an outside perspective, a rather unexpected move. And I think that it's one of the things that drew particular attention to the AIDS series that he did is the fact that he chose to do something very innovative and progressive by looking back in history and finding his source material from earlier times.
Yeah, so that's really speaking about the role of the art as a social critique.
Right,
And,
absolutely. Yeah.
and talk about censorship. You know, some these images that we show today are the less explicit images you have, and you have more explicit images that's going to be shown at this exhibition, right? So the censorship is, you know, this kind of painting being able to be on exhibition in Japan.
Well, I think, yeah, that's, you know, the starting point for all of this is one of the reasons why we felt very strongly that it was important for us to do this series of exhibitions, is because even up to today, it's still not possible to do an exhibition on erotic art in Japan. Even if it's Japanese erotic art from the 17th century, you still can't do an exhibition on it in
Even though
Japan.
they don't look anything like, you
Indeed.
know.
And many Japanese scholars have looked to us as having a unique opportunity to highlight a very important aspect of Japanese art that they still can't openly talk about in Japan. There have been some steps in Japan towards being able to publish uncensored images of historic artwork, for example. But at the same time, just in the last few months in Japan, there have been 2 very prominent cases of artistic censorship surrounding erotic artwork, where artists or museums have either been arrested or approached by the police about self-censorship.
There is a female sculptor by the name of Megumi Igarashi. She also goes by the artist name of Rokude Nashiko. And a few months ago, she decided that she wanted to produce a sculpture. Actually, it's a functional kayak, but the center of the kayak, the whole of the kayak, is essentially a digital reproduction of a vagina.
Oh, okay. So there goes the censorship there.
And she actually was arrested by the police in Japan for doing this.
And the artwork was seized.
So people probably have to come out of Japan to come to Honolulu to see this,
Sure,
which is coming up. Modern Love, 20th Century Japanese Erotic Art. When does it start?
It opens on November 20th.
So it's coming up. So go take a look, and you'll need to be 18 and above to see it.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for both of you for coming here and educate us about the museum and about this upcoming art exhibition.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you, Hong.
Again, this is Asia in Review at ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jiang. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.